Now, with federal cabinet meeting in Perth, Labor's current clutch of West Australian MPs get a bit of a profile boost as several ministers are out and about there. We've already spoken to one who was with the Prime Minister this morning, West Australian time. The member for Fremantle, Josh Wilson, is also getting a bit of a profile boost. He's among those looking for a decision sometime in the near future on the phase out of the live sheep export trade. He joined us from our Perth studios a little earlier. Josh Wilson, thanks for coming back on the program. We'll come to border protection in just a moment, but you've got federal cabinet in town today. I suppose that's an opportunity for it to address something we've spoken to you about, and which I think our audience would be very familiar with, the fact that you've long campaigned on. You've been somewhat patient. Do you want today a date settled for an end to live sheep exports?
Thanks, Greg. Good to be with you. Look, I don't think we're going to get that date today, but we'll get it in due course because the Minister, since the election of the government, has followed a steady process. He was over here within a few weeks of the election of the new government, starting that consultation process, then appointed the independent panel, and it's provided the report to him. He received that late last year, so we'd expect in due course we'll get his response, which will include a plan and a timetable, but I don't think that's part of the agenda for the cabinet meeting in the West, as much as it is great to have so many colleagues over here on a very hot couple of days. All
right, and you accept, do you, the stated policy position that the phase out would not be completed or would not take place, I think are the words, during this current term of the Australian Parliament?
Well, I think when you consider that the term may have 18 months or so to go, it's not unreasonable that the transition will take a little bit longer than that. But what is clear is that we've committed to managing the transition. That's a sensible and responsible thing to do for a trade that has been declining for 20 years, that's declined by more than 90%, is worth less than 1% of Western Australian agricultural outputs and less than 0.1% of Australia's agricultural outputs. It really is a marginal and unnecessary trade that continues, unfortunately, to produce animal welfare crises, as we've just seen with the MV Bahija. So we're doing the responsible thing in a measured and consultative way, but it won't come to an end inside this term of Parliament.
Last one on this, because I do want to take you to border protection. Josh Wilson, since you mentioned the MV Bahija, of the 16,000 sheep that went across the Indian Ocean and then back again, officials told estimates last week 61 animals, or 0.43% of sheep on board, died. Now, any would be regrettable, of course, but doesn't that strike you as an astoundingly low death rate or high survival rate?
The question isn't really just about whether animals die, it's whether they suffer, what they experience. I think most people would say that animals can experience a significant amount of suffering that is less than fatal. And indeed, the actual animal welfare regulations that we apply are not about mortality rates. So the industry does like to point to low mortality rates, and of course it's better to have that than to have some of the very high mortality events that occurred in the past with this trade. But the measure is about heat stress and suffering, and that's really something that the industry hasn't been able to overcome. You think about the sheep on the MV Bahija, they were aboard in close quarters, in relatively hot conditions, in unnatural circumstances for sheep, which weren't really made to go to sea, for 40 days. The longest voyage that occurred in 2022 was only 23 days. So those sheep were aboard for nearly twice as long, and there isn't really any question. All of the evidence, the independent vet reports and the analyses that occurred under the previous government with the McCarthy inquiry show that intolerable heat stress is experienced by animals, not surprisingly, when you send them to one of the hottest and most unstable parts of the world, in the past at the hottest time of the year.
Yeah, all right, let's move on. Josh Wilson, I'm sure we'll be talking about that subject again with you. Are you satisfied that all aspects of border protection policy are working and are currently appropriate? Well,
the Operation Sovereign Borders policy remains the same under this government as it was under the previous government. The person in charge of Operation Sovereign Borders has confirmed that, and the funding for the program is increasing under this government, increasing every year, and it will increase by $500 million over the forward. So there's nothing about the approach to our borders that's changed, and there's nothing about the Liberal Party that's changed, because here we go again, a coalition that doesn't have any positive policies can't wait to get its hands on a scare campaign or something that involves negativity and fear-mongering for their own political benefits, even when they know and they're advised by people involved in Operation Sovereign Borders that kind of hyperventilation actually harms our interests and puts people in those circumstances at greater risk.
Should the government commit, Josh, to 90-day processing of the caseload currently on Nauru? And we believe, although the government's being less than transparent about this, that the number should be about 54 who are there. Should they be processed in 90 days in line with ALP platform?
Well, you want people to be processed as quickly as possible, and I think our record shows in opposition and in government that we have a genuine commitment to that. We know that displaced people is a global problem, refugees are a global problem, and Australia has a contribution to make, but should be made in a steady, measured, humanitarian way. We've already begun to do that in some ways that are different from the previous government in terms of picking up some of that caseload, remembering of course that they did defund and run down our immigration procedures, and that some of the consequences of that include the exploitation of our visa system by criminal syndicates. So we're certainly going to make sure that our system operates in a high integrity, measured way, and that will include the way that we deal with people who seek asylum in our region.
All right, and you're personally comfortable, are you, with the long-standing stipulation that no refugees established on Nauru will ever permanently settle in this country?
Well, I'm satisfied with the measures that are in place under Sovereign Borders that are the same under our government as they were under the previous government, because we don't want something to shift that allows criminals or smugglers to give encouragement for people to part with their money and to undertake dangerous voyages. What is clear about the events of the last 7 or 8 days is that Peter Dutton has no such compunction. He's never seen a fear campaign that he hasn't wanted to grab with both hands, and he will do that for his own benefit, even when it is not in Australia's interests.
All right, point made. Josh Wilson, time is against us today. We'll thank you, say farewell, and catch up again on the program.